Hello, Hey Boomer listeners. This is going to be a little bit of an experiment today, so I would really love to know if you're watching right now. I'm probably going to take this first part off when I edit for the podcast, but I just wanted to explain to you what's going on. As you know, it's a solo episode today, and I've done a ton of research. Hi, Mark. I've done a ton of research to put this episode together. And so I have a lot of notes. And I'm in my office, as you can see, which is not where I usually am. Hi, Martha. And so I have a split screen situation going on here. So I really try to look at you when I'm talking, but I am going to be looking up at the other screen to look at my notes. So hopefully that is not too confusing as we go, but here we go. So I don't know too many millennials who are ages 26 to 41 or Gen Zs who are age 10 to 25. My grandchildren are part of the Gen Z generation. And the oldest of my grandchildren will be going to college next year. We don't know where yet. And she does have a part-time job, but she is not really part of the earning generation yet in Gen Z. There are some, like I said, they're up to age 25. So some of them are now gainfully employed in the marketplace. But the Gen Z generation is very aware of the political landscape, and they are very involved in being involved, because they're concerned about climate change, they're concerned about racial inequality, they're concerned about financial inequality, they're concerned about gender issues. So I didn't include the Gen X in this conversation. The Gen X, I have actually quite a few friends that are in the Gen X generation, and my children are part of Gen X. And their generation does not seem to have the generational divide that seems to be separating the boomers and beyond from the millennials and Gen Z. So that is what I want to talk about today. Welcome to the Hey Boomer Show. My name is Wendy Green, and I am the host of Hey Boomer. And in this episode, I want to start the conversation about the differences and the similarities between the boomer and beyond generation and the millennial and Gen Z generation. I want to talk about how we might bridge some of the gaps between the generations and why I believe that is important. I am on a mission to support and inspire adults in their next act of life to find new beginnings, to confront endings and transitions, and to evolve into who they want to be. That mission is the fuel that keeps me motivated. And I hope you find inspiration and motivation with the stories that we share on Hey Boomer. So let's jump into this conversation. When I started Hey Boomer 2.5 years ago, my very first episode was a recap of some of the events that shaped the lives of many in the boomer generation. I talked about the Cuban Missile Crisis, the assassination of John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. I talked about the easy availability of birth control, our involvement in the civil rights movement, the women's movement, and the Vietnam War. The millennials, who were born between 1981 and 1986, were shaped significantly by the 9/11 attack. It really threatened their sense of security as they were growing up. They also have been impacted by the social media connections that emerged and became common in their generation. A third impact on them was the social recession that happened in 2008 and 2009. Many of the people in the millennial generation were just finishing college then, coming out with a lot of debt, entering or hoping to enter the workforce, and found that many of their job opportunities were limited at that point. So financial constraints have caused a lot of impact for the millennials. And finally, Gallup calls this generation the job hopping generation. They are the first generation that really is not finding a sense of loyalty and commitment to a particular organization or a particular industry. Gen Zs are categorized as being born between 1997 and 2012. A major impact on this generation has been the COVID pandemic. Most of them, the young ones in through college, were impacted by this 2-year shutdown of their interaction with their classmates, with their colleagues while they were in school. So they have suffered a lot of isolation, similar to what many of those of us in the older generation and even, the silent generation have experienced as well. But this generation is also more socially minded than previous generations. According to the Annie E. Casey Foundation, Gen Zs are focused on 7 key social issues: healthcare, mental health, higher education, economic security, civic engagement, race, equity, and environment. With education being a priority for this generation, student debt will have a big impact on their financial viability. And some studies are showing that they have started to save for their future retirement as young as the age of 19, which is younger than most of us started saving for retirement. And the reason for this is because the prospect of the Gen Zs to live to 100 is creating a different perspective of what life could look like for them. Part of their interest in health and wellness comes from their concern that aging means declining. And they are concerned about declining before they get a chance to experience some of the things that they want to experience in this lifetime. One of the reasons for my conversation today is to try to, like I said, bridge the gap so that they can also recognize that older age and decline don't necessarily go hand in hand. But where they are now, they are concerned about working for those extended years. So say they got out of school at 22, 23, and they're saying, if I'm going to live to 100, I probably have to work till I'm 80 and then have my 20 years of retirement. Imagine if we had to think about working straight through from the age of 22 to the age of 80. That's a very long work life. And most people would find that a very difficult thing to do. They would feel physically and emotionally burned out. It could have some very negative implications for their relationships with people that are important in their lives. And so the traditional 3-stage life that we've thought about, you go to school, then you work, then you retire, is probably not a realistic outlook for Gen Zs particularly, and maybe not even for millennials. I just finished reading a book called The 100-Year Life by Linda Gratton and Andrew Scott. And they give some different scenarios where the younger generation may go to school, work for a while, or take some gap years to build some social networks. Then they will have to work and then retool. So there might be another break in there. And so their projection of what a work and social life for Gen Zs and millennials is much more fluid and much more flexible than the 3-stage life that we have been used to. And the third thing that these younger people have to think about is they don't have a pension in the sense of particularly a corporate pension, right? Most of them have been switched over to 401ks, but they also may not have the government pensions of Social Security and Medicare. That is something that governments are going to have to look at as The younger generation ages and moves up, but that is really beyond the scope of what I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about today is the social disruption that is already happening with the younger generation and the similarities to the societal change that we in the boomer generation were involved with, and some thoughts about how to bridge those generation gaps. So as we, the boomers, realized once we took on the responsibility of family and home ownership, work and financial attainment were definitely important to us, and they will be important to the younger generation. Also, as we realized, social problems require commitment and passion. And at various times in our lives, we had more time for commitment and passion. And other times in our life, we had less time for commitment and passion to social change. But the more people that I speak with in the boomer generation and beyond, the more they talk about the need to feel useful, the need to find a purpose and a reason to get up every day. Now, keep that in mind, the need to feel useful, the need to find a purpose, a reason to get up every day. Now let's look at the younger generation. Their greatest concern, based on many polls, is mental health, education, and climate change. And they have an interest in finding work that gives them meaning and provides a sense of balance between work and other things that are important. And when you think about that, the difference between their generation needing to find work that is important and gives them a sense of meaning, and where we are now in our lives, the importance of finding a sense of meaning and purpose, the difference between those generations diminishes. So the problem is, though, that there is a lack of understanding between the generations, and there seems to be blaming and shaming going both ways. Millennials blaming the boomers for many of the problems our planet and our social structures are experiencing now. The boomers blaming the younger generation for being lazy, not committed to work, committed to or glued to their screens. And there are many social changes that we in the boomer generation can't relate to or don't understand. For instance, think about this. The young people today grew up with active shooter drills. We grew up with fire drills. The youngest of the Gen Z generation, they grew up isolated from their peers, some up to 2 years because of the shutdowns of the schools. When we weren't in school, we were outside playing all day. And our one requirement was be home by dark. Young people today hear dire predictions about melting ice caps, rising seas, warming temperatures, the impact of which will more directly affect their future than our own. Many people in our generation do not understand the gender fluidity that has entered the conversation. But we do understand being passionate about making our communities safer, healthier places to be. And we do understand being involved in social change. And yet the generations are mostly segregated. Like I said, I don't really know millennials as people that I spend time with. So how did we get here with this age segregation that's going on? Well, before the 1950s, many families had 3 generations living together. In 1954, 2 developers bought 320 acres of land in Maricopa County, Arizona, and they built the first planned community dedicated to retirees. It wasn't too long after that that Del Webb, I'm sure you've all heard of Del Webb, took up this idea and began the process of creating retirement communities across the country. Now, for older people who can afford it, there are now continuing care communities. So these types of age segregated communities tend to cut people off from some of the new ideas and from some of the vitality that young people can bring. It also means that young people do not get to experience the companionship and the wisdom of some of the people over 45, over 55, or over 45. Paul Irving, who is a senior fellow and founding chair of the Center for the Future of Aging at the Milken Institute, said this about the benefits of intergenerational living versus the homogeneous, age-restricted retirement communities that we see now. He said, "What kind of society are we building? A society that encourages understanding and collaboration and appreciation of others, or a society that reinforces the divides that already challenge America?" I would make the case that bringing older and younger Americans together enhances the lives of both age groups, and in the mix, increases the likelihood of collaboration, mutual understanding, and appreciation. So what are some options for intergenerational living that are now being explored? There are some websites that have popped up that are promoting multi-generational roommates, giving older people who have extra rooms in their homes the opportunity to join with younger people who are looking for lower rents, and also can provide some assistance and help with household chores, things that might have come more challenging for the older adults. There's a concept called communities with a purpose. One of those examples is Bridge Meadows, which is located in Portland, Oregon. And the concept there is to join older adults with young families who have taken and adopted foster care children into their homes, and they're still working. So the older adults in these communities can help them. And examples that were given were they may come over early in the morning and help the children with breakfast and get them to the bus stop so that the parents can get to work. The older adults may help with homework, teach the children to swim. So it's a mutually beneficial type of a community with a purpose, because it's helping both the young families and the older adults feel that sense of purpose. There's another community that I read about called Pemberton Park for Grand Families. And this is in Kansas City, Missouri. And it's designed specifically for grandparents raising their grandchildren. So not only are the homes built to bring in more grandchildren and their families, but it also has programming that ranges from schools and free time activities for the young and continuing education courses for the seniors. Sounds kind of interesting. Beth likes that idea. So these are just some of the experiments of intergenerational living, an option that is really gaining more interest since the COVID pandemic, when so many older adults were isolated away from their family and friends. And my hope is that we see this trend continue so that when I'm ready, I can find a community of purpose or an intergenerational type of community to continue to live in. We also need to have more intergenerational conversations. So over this past year, since Roe v. Wade was overturned, I saw a lot of women my age or older at a lot of the women's rallies protesting the overturning of Roe v. Wade. We also see a lot of young people who are at the rallies for climate change or Black Lives Matter. But dividing our energies, how much sense does that really make? Just imagine if we shared our passion, shared our ideas, discussed some of the challenges and opportunities that we face trying to address some of these social changes and social issues. We could discuss strategies and join forces for social good. Those of us in the boomer generation would be learners and advisors. We would find meaning and fulfillment in working on causes that are important to us and in the continuous learning that we would get, as well as the vitality that we would get from working with the younger generation. And then the younger generation could become our teachers as well as learners, as they bring us up to speed on the latest technology and lingo, and then find encouragement and wisdom from people who have been involved in social movements before. So there is an organization called encore.org that has recently rebranded itself to cogenerate.org. And their purpose is to bridge generational divides to co-create the future, because we have a lot to learn from each other. So some of the organizations that are working on co-creating the future along with CoGenerate are things like Generations Over Dinner. You may remember that we had Michael Hebb as a guest on Hey Boomer, and he talked about death over dinner and generations over dinner. And I'm hoping to do a Generations Over dinner so that we can start that conversation between generations. All of these that I'm going to mention here will be in the show notes, and you can also email me about to get a document with all of these organizations in it. So the next one is the Greater Good Science Center at Berkeley, and they have something called Bridging the Differences Playbook. Another organization is Can You Hear Us, that has developed Intergenerational Conversations, a guide to bridge building. And they talk mostly about the climate movement. There's a resource called Becoming a Mentor, Strategies to Be There for Young People, that's available through an organization called mentor.org. Maybe you've heard of Third Act. Third Act is mobilizing older Americans to stand with young activists fighting for climate change and democracy. Eldera is connecting elders and young people for virtual mentoring. Big and Mini is focused on ending loneliness through connecting younger and older people for friendly video chats. Sages and Seekers offers programs and events that allow for meaningful intergenerational conversations. And Civic Saturday brings people together for purposeful events that rebuild faith in one another and our democracy. My intention is to get a spokesperson from as many of these organizations on Hey Boomer as a guest to help us all learn about what's being done to bridge the gaps between the generations. Oh, it looks like Mark's giving us a lot of ideas. Thank you, Mark. You can see those links in the chat. So there was a survey done at the University of Chicago on generational concerns and the desire of generations to work together. Okay, this was a sizable segment of the younger and older population that indicated a hunger for opportunities not only for intergenerational connection, but co-generational action, the chance to join forces in co-creating a better future. The result of that survey makes so much sense to me. As boomers and beyond, we want to share what we've learned in life, and younger people are eager to connect with us as learners. And there seems to be a recognition across generations that we can't implement social change in isolation. There needs to be collaboration. With that said, though, some of the focus on the different generations is a little bit different, which I found very interesting. The older people's top priority for social co-generational work is the environment. And that makes sense because we want to leave the world a better place. We recognize there has been damage. We have taken our eye off the ball. Maybe we didn't even know what to keep our eyes on at some point, but we know now. And we want to focus on protecting the environment for the future. Interestingly, the young people seem to put mental health at the top of the list, which also makes sense coming out of the COVID pandemic and the isolation that they had to experience as young people. So a cross-generational alliance on working on the environment and mental health issues could be very strong and impactful. The study also reported that those who have worked across generations for social change have really valued the experience and they want to do more of it. They cite learning, sharing knowledge, and increasing appreciation for the other generations as most frequently cited. Among the Millennials and Gen Zs who have worked for change with people at least 25 years older than themselves, they said the experience was positive because it increased their appreciation for older generations. Remember, I said at the beginning, they have a fear of this decline that's going to happen when they get old. But by working with older people, they're starting to see that there is so much more possible as we age, and it doesn't mean necessarily decline. For the boomers, Gen X, and those beyond, some of what they said about working with people 25 years younger than them, they said it allowed me to share what I knew, and it also, I gained appreciation for the younger generation. I no longer saw them as so different and lazy or screen obsessed. Here's a quote from Bill McKibben, who has been an environmental activist for years and is now the founder of Third Act. He says, young people are building the world they're going to have to live in. We want to shape the world that we're going to leave behind. Those two things mesh up beautifully. So the desire to work co-generationally is there, but there are a couple of obstacles that must be addressed if we are to unleash and scale a multi-generational force for good. First, we need to end the age segregation that keeps older people and younger people apart and that creates the stereotypes on both sides that we underestimate the abilities of the older people and we underestimate the abilities and the commitment of the younger people. We also need to create more opportunities to work across generations for social change and easier ways to find them. It is too easy to see the divides in our nation across age, race, culture, identity, income, politics. It's harder to see the areas of agreement. But the research out of the University of Chicago reveals that there are many areas of agreement. People believe that working across generations will create a stronger nation, less divided, and better able to solve its problems. The generations want to teach and learn together. I would be curious in hearing your thoughts about working across generations. Are you already doing this? Or are you looking for ways to do this, but you're finding them difficult to find? And if you are already doing this, what have you learned from the experience? Or what obstacles do you find in looking for ways to work across generations? So what are a couple of my takeaways for this conversation today? First, I wanted to open the conversation of the importance of breaking down the barriers between the generations, stop the blaming and shaming, and build bridges between the generations. We are stronger together. And we, as the older generations, need that sense of purpose, that need to feel useful. The younger generation has a strong commitment to social change. and is willing to work together. And it benefits them by breaking down their stereotypes of what an older person is capable of and who an older person really is. And we need to find ways, I hope, to break down the age segregation, to stop putting older people away in retirement communities, in old age restricted communities, and create communities where people can live together and support each other and learn from each other. That is my hope as well. And finally, I am looking forward to 2023 when I will be bringing in people to talk about this more, to expand the vision of Hey Boomer to include multiple generations in finding our sense of purpose. So I hope that this discussion today inspired some thoughts and insights about building bridges between generations. And if you would like to email me some of your thoughts about how that can happen or things that you're seeing now, you can email me at wendy@heyboomer.biz, and I'd be happy to share some of your thoughts in upcoming episodes. Also, email me if you would like to see some of the organizations that I talked about today. I will send you a document with all of the links to all of the organizations I mentioned today, to the studies I mentioned today, if you're interested in that. So just drop me a note and I'll send you that information as well. So next week will be my last show for 2022. My guest for next week is Sarah Hart. And Sarah is the host of a program called Prime Spark. Prime Spark is focused on helping women over 55 who want to thrive, make the best choices for their prime years, and fight how culture tries to depict older women. Dr. Hart earned her PhD at Northwestern University, and then she taught at Queens College in New York City. She has worked in corporate settings, had her own consulting company, and worked in nonprofit arenas. And I will be a guest on her show in the new year. So let's see, what did Josephine said? I hit like and love, and a different icon went through against like last time. Oh, okay. And David says, I have a lot of contact with college students. It keeps him going. And Mark wants to live in a multi-generational community. I think we need to figure out how to create that. So thank you all for joining today. And I always like to encourage you to live with passion, live with relevance, and live with courage. And remember that you are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. My name is Wendy Green, and this has been Hey Boomer.